We have so much hardware news to talk about today, including AMD's CEO saying that their SoC is ready to support a next-generation Xbox in 2027. DRAM prices expected to double in Q1 of 2026, although 3D Center is reporting that DDR5 prices in Germany have stabilized since mid-January. Microsoft losing massive shareholder value as they are skeptical of their AI strategy's success, and they're backpedaling on some of those AI features, or at least re-examining them in Windows and working to build trust in like the basic performance reliability of the overall Windows experience. Nvidia is supposedly having 3 of their RTX 50 cards make up 75% of their Q1 2026 supply, according to board channels, and AMD's board partners are reportedly planning a 5 to 10% price increase on GPUs while prioritizing 8GB models. GeForce NOW is getting Linux native app, and then there's also a leak of a PlayStation Portal OLED coming in 2026 and a next-gen PlayStation Handheld using RDNA5 architecture. We have Nintendo Switch 2 continuing to have strong sales, and AMD did launch the 9850X 3D, and I haven't bothered to mention it on the channel yet, so I probably should. Meanwhile, Intel might be re-entering the memory business, but maybe not in the way that you're hoping. And Arc Raiders is still dominating sales of games, and Obsidian had some issues. Let's jump around back to the beginning for more details. There's always the chapters timestamps in the bottom of the video if you want to jump to your most interesting topic. Now, so are we really going to get a next-generation Xbox in 2027? Well, we don't know that for sure, but AMD's CEO, Dr. Lisa Su, literally said, quote, "Development of Microsoft's next-gen Xbox featuring an AMD semi-custom SoC is progressing well to support a launch in 2027. Now, that is certainly interesting, but note it doesn't actually say the next-gen Xbox will launch in 2027. They're really saying that AMD's side of the equation, which is to develop the semi-custom SoC, is progressing well and could support a launch in 2027, but that's only if Xbox chooses to launch in that time frame. Now, one reason that Xbox may want to delay their next-gen console is DRAM prices. So you don't want to launch a console at a price where no one will buy it, and Microsoft has shown that they are less willing than ever to sell consoles for a loss, which has been a traditional console strategy, take a hit on the console sale price in order to sell software. But with Microsoft continuing to raise the prices of the Series X and S, they're seemingly less willing than ever to take any sort of a hit like that. So it's very possible that we'll end up seeing gaming consoles delayed, even if they had originally been planned for a 2027 or 2028 launch. Those could get pushed back a year or more to wait for RAM prices to stabilize so that the console makers can launch them at a price that they feel customers would actually buy, rather than having some disastrous launch where it's a $1,000 console, everybody gets upset, nobody buys it. Now, where are we getting this DRAM prices expected to double in Q1? Well, I found this here at the Register, but they're quoting TrendForce. Now, TrendForce had already predicted a 55 to 60% rise during the first quarter of 2026, but they have now, based on further analysis, revised their estimates to a 90 to 95%, so basically doubling of prices. Now, I can't really comment on that other than, yeah, things look bad. However, 3D Center has been monitoring the prices of DDR5 at German retailers, averaging it out over time, and they've actually mentioned that from mid-January till now, the beginning of February, they've only seen a plus 0.1% average price. Now, that certainly seems good. However, that's just DDR5 memory prices at certain German retailers, not necessarily worldwide. And when we're looking at memory price increases like this, we're talking more like the contract price that the manufacturers are, purchasing at rather than the end unit price that you see on the open market, which may have already increased more substantially than the actual spot price. In other words, they might be taking a bit of an increased margin on these just because they can. So in other words, we'll have to wait and see what actually happens in that monthly price increase. Notice that over time, starting in July and going month by month, they've seen from July to August a 1.6% increase, August to September 1.5%. September to October, things started heating up with a almost 16% increase. And then from October to November, almost a 50% increase. And then November to December, basically doubling, 93% increase. From December to January, things slowed down a bit, but still almost a 28% increase, but then only basically flatlining from January, mid-January to the beginning of February. So interesting, but again, we'll have to go ahead and see how this plays out long term. I doubt we've seen the top of the DDR5 pricing yet, but hopefully at least the acceleration is slowing down on that. Now, Microsoft is reporting massive losses in their stock prices as of a couple of days ago. I didn't check in again today, but this was following an earnings report. Now, what's interesting when you look at the earnings report is that they actually did report a ton of growth in all of their AI-related businesses. However, it wasn't enough growth to satisfy investors. Now, the key detail here is that capital expenditures have been off the charts. I think something like $40 billion or something like that quarterly, investing in AI, buying Nvidia GPUs, all that kind of stuff. And if there's not showing enough of an actual profit coming from AI, eventually investors are going to get a little bit spooked. Like, okay, we're investing all of these billions and billions and billions of dollars of capital. When does it start actually turning a profit and making end users happy? So that's the big question with all this. And I know some people are hoping for the whole AI boom to collapse to then maybe tank the prices of DRAM so that people can buy their gaming PCs. And I totally understand that from the gaming PC perspective. I mean, from people, who rely on their, 401k or whatever in the market, I mean, less exciting. Well, it's a little bit scary how much it seems like the entire stock market is propped up by AI investments right now. So we'll have yet to see exactly how much of a bubble this is and when it pops, and if it pops, how badly. But yeah, now Microsoft is also saying they're working on rebuilding trust in Windows, specifically dedicating engineers to focus on performance, reliability, and the overall Windows experience. Now, I might ask the question, were they not focusing on those things before? Because those seem like pretty basic, most important things possible to focus on. I know there's been a lot of focus on adding Copilot to everything, and they're now looking into what, by the way, all my sources will be in the video description. You can follow up more on all of these. This is from The Verge. They're looking into, like, do we actually need a Copilot button in, Paint or whatever, right? So I think this is cool. Now, from my perspective, I've been so frustrated with Windows 11's constant nag screens to try to get you to sign up for their features, switch your browser over to Edge, sign up for Game Pass, subscribe to OneDrive, because so my oldest daughter is 9, and I'm trying to start teaching her how to use a computer, how to use it for productivity uses, etc. And she's constantly having issues where she just tries to log in, and she has the Windows stuff just try to sell her things. She's like scared to click on the wrong thing. So it's hard to have a basic user just use the computer with Windows installed on it and not have it constantly pop up to these scary screens where you're scared you're going to click the wrong button and accidentally buy something or change all of your settings away from how you wanted it. And of course, from the Windows perspective, they want you to accidentally sign up and agree to all these things that get even more of your data and sell you more things and switch you over to their browser and all of that. But it is an awful end user experience. It's absolutely terrible. And they really do need to fix that. Now, let's start talking about the GPU situation, which is apparently, now this is coming from board channels. I found it at videocards.com. Again, all sources linked in the video description. According to board channels, let's just read the post. So there's this constant thought on, okay, did Nvidia actually cancel the 5070 Ti? Again, it's probably reduced supply of it, but in what ways? Exactly what does this look like from the supply side of things? Now, Nvidia is not making anything public, but at board channels, they have a lot of first-party sources like within either Nvidia themselves or add-in card brands. So like Asus, MSI, Zotac, Gigabyte, all those ones who are going to actually put together the GPUs, and they have to know what kind of supply to expect. So that's where board channels kind of gets their sources, although they don't cite any particular specific source. So what are they saying? According to the latest news from upstream, Nvidia manufacturers, mainly due to the shortage and price increase of graphics memory, Nvidia and AIC brands have adjusted their main sales strategies for Q1 2026 with a focus on selling 8GB models. So, focus is on 8GB models. More specifically, internal sources from Nvidia and AIC brands indicate adjustments to the supply plan for the RTX 50 series GPUs in Q1 of 2026, with the following approximate supply plan. The RTX 5060 Ti 8GB series will be the mainstream and primary model, followed by the RTX 5060 8GB series, and then the RTX 5070 series. These three series will be the main sales models for Nvidia in the future, while other models will have limited supply depending on actual demand. Based on Nvidia's supply ratio guidance, the three main series of GPUs will account for approximately 75% of the supply, with the remaining 25%, just being other models, and they kind of said depending on the actual demand up here. Based on this guidance, distributors nationwide need to adjust their sales strategies accordingly and implement more precise control over inventory and sales. Okay, so what are we getting out of this? Basically, approximately 75% of NVIDIA GPU shipments are going to be focused on these three models, the 5060 Ti 8GB, to a lesser extent the 5060 non-Ti, which is also 8GB, and the 5070, which is 12GB. So clearly this is further confirmation that the 16GB 5060 Ti, the 5070 Ti, which is 16GB, and maybe even the 5080 and 5090 are going to be deprioritized. But again, deprioritized, not quite the same thing as completely canceled, although some AIC brands, like maybe Asus, might be choosing to not really bother with 5070 Ti's right now. We'll have to wait and see how that fully plays out. But this looks like the strategy. Now, that's 75% of the supply. What happens with the rest of it? I imagine it will be some mix of 5070 Ti, 5080, 5090, and 5050, because that's what's left. Now, how exactly those all get allocated, again, probably depend on the demand for those parts at the prices that they'd be able to sell them for. So I imagine they'll kind of look at, are these selling at their higher prices and in what quantity, and then kind of trickling out the amount of them that seems to be the market would be able to support. And these cards won't see as drastic of price increases because they have less VRAM, so they're less affected, although still affected, by the increase in memory pricing and the low supply. Just the fact that these have fewer VRAM modules tied up into each card means you can actually just ship more total units of cards as well. So there we go. That's it. Further confirmation on what's going on here. And I don't think any of this is surprising. I went over a couple of days ago over all of the prices of these cards in the United States, and this certainly seems to be borne out, where these three cards have seen price increases, but less dramatically than everything else. All the other cards in the lineup are seeing pretty dramatic price increases. Now, how about AMD? The AMD cards, when I checked in a couple of days ago, had seen some price increases. but not as dramatically as many of the Nvidia cards. So it did start to make cards like the 9070 and 9070 XT a bit more attractive than they were previously, because they, relative to the Nvidia cards, had started to offer a little more from a price to performance standpoint. But that might be starting to end as we move further into the year. So also from videocards.com, but this is coming also from board channels, is some discussion of what's going to be happening to AMD GPU pricing. So they're saying that in January, AMD brand manufacturers generally increased the cost of most models by 5 to 10%. According to upstream suppliers, most brands may implement a second price increase starting in February or March. Now, I should stop right here and mention that, remember, when the board manufacturers have a price increase, that isn't immediately going to impact what we see at the store when we buy a gaming GPU. Because the stores buy the GPUs that were already produced in the past, right? So it takes time for the GPU to be produced by the board partners, then they're sold on to retailers, it takes time to ship there, and then the retailers stock them, and then we buy them. So there's some lag time in between these price increases and when we see them on the market. So we've seen AMD prices go up. It's unclear if this January increase has been fully factored into that yet. It might have, it might not have. And then we could be seeing additional price increases in February or March. It's a little unclear what that second price increase is going to be. Anyway, as we continue, the initial cost increase in January, though small, spurred downstream distributors to stock up. According to the latest news from manufacturers, some AMD graphics card manufacturers may implement a second cost increase starting in February or March, with the extent unclear. It is expected that the cost will catch up with the cost level of comparable Nvidia models, maintaining a price similar to Nvidia's corresponding models. So that's frustrating. We've got especially the catching up to the Nvidia pricing there, because right now, when I checked a couple of days ago, like I said, the AMD prices had gone up, but not as badly percentage-wise as the Nvidia models. So the AMD, especially 9070 XT compared to like a 5070 Ti, looked pretty reasonable from a relative standpoint in the current market. If they just increase pricing to match Nvidia's, why would I buy the AMD model, to be honest? So that is what it is. We'll have to keep an eye on the pricing in the actual market. There's a second board channels post here that says similar, but maybe a little bit more information. Considering the high price of video memory, AMD will adjust its product line starting in 2026. This mainly involves slight adjustments to the production capacity of various GPU models, with a primary strategy favoring the sale of 8GB models. So, like Nvidia, it's looking like AMD will be prioritizing the 8GB models over the higher memory capacity models. AMD and its AIB partners will focus on selling 8GB models, particularly the 9060 XT 8GB series and the RX 7650 GRE. That's a Chinese-only card. So to be clear, Board Channels is a Chinese language site. So some of what they're saying here focus specifically on the Chinese region and sometimes is less representative of the worldwide region. So something to keep in mind here. They're saying that by focusing on these 8GB models, it maximizes production capacity. Because again, you can produce 2 8GB cards for every 16GB card if your production constraint is VRAM modules. Now, they're saying for 16GB models, the focus will remain on the 9060 XT 16GB and 9070 XT series, while production of the 9070 and 9070 GRE series will be significantly reduced. So they're saying that the XT version versus the 9070 non-XT version will receive priority. 9070 GRE, again, Chinese only, so I'm not going to focus too much on that. With a weakening of sales efforts, these adjustments to product structure and supply will be a long-term sales strategy for AMD and its AIB partners in the mainland China market. So again, they're emphasizing that is mainland China market. It's possible it also applies to other regions, but they are mentioning the mainland China market on those production ideas. Now, in other news, a lot of people are wondering if the end goal here is to get everybody to switch over to cloud gaming. Now, I don't see how realistic that is from like everybody switching over. And we don't need to get into all of the problems with not owning your hardware right now. There's certainly problems with it. Maybe I'll do a whole video on the problems with streaming. There's also the technology's been getting a lot better. The quality's been getting a lot better. There's some convenience aspects to streaming. Certainly if you're like on a weak PC and want to play a game that doesn't run well on it, there's something to be said for having the option to stream. And with that in mind, there is now a Linux native app for GeForce NOW, although it doesn't necessarily support all possible Linux distros at this point with full compatibility. They're claiming specific support for Steam Deck and Ubuntu with which Ubuntu version 24.04 and later. Again, could work on other systems as well. Worth testing out, but just thought I'd mention that is GeForce NOW is getting that Linux native support. So if you have some like weak Linux PC that you use for other stuff, but maybe wanted to play some games on it now and then, it's not powerful enough to run it natively, that's where I think something like this could be interesting. But I am firmly against, if there was any push to like just no longer have physical gaming PCs locally and just stream everything and you own nothing, because there's all sorts of problems with that. Now, speaking of streaming games, the PlayStation Portal is apparently going to be getting an OLED version, according to leaks, not officially, for 2026 launch at some point. And also, there should be a RDNA5 chipset in the upcoming Sony handheld console. Now, none of this is official. I found this at Tech Power Up. Where are they getting the information? The leaks are coming from Kepler L2. Now, Kepler L2 has leaked things correctly regarding AMD specifically, and even PlayStation leaks. I think Kepler had some of the first leaks of the like PS5 Pro specs, things like that. So as track records go, I would say, not 100%, but like get some things right, might have some actual internal information that's not available to the general public. Not unreasonable to believe that that's the case. Basically saying, yeah, there will be a Portal that will be an OLED version coming this year, according to Kepler L2. Take that as you may. And that there will be a RDNA5 chip in the upcoming PlayStation handheld. Now, speaking of handheld consoles, the Nintendo Switch 2 has now sold 17.37 million units, and the software is up to 37.93 million units. While that's certainly behind the 155 million for the Nintendo Switch 1, it hasn't been out very long yet, and it has been trending pretty well relative to the Switch 1 sales over the same time period, probably because they've shipped a lot of units. It's unclear yet if they're going to be able to maintain their price in the face of memory costs going up. Last I heard on it, they said that, at least in the near term, it shouldn't be an issue because they have a long-term contract. But eventually contracts do run out, have to get renegotiated, and if DRAM prices have doubled again since then, it could start to impact those prices. The 9850X3D CPU did indeed launch a few days ago, and I kind of forgot to even bother mentioning it because it's a 9800X3D with a tiny overclock. It's less efficient and gets you a 3%, maybe 4% performance increase in some games if you happen to be CPU limited on your 9800X3D. Now, the only potential benefits here is it has seemed to slightly push down the price of the 9800X3D original version, which is nice. And then the 9850X3D didn't have a crazy price tag attached. We'll have to see how the overall market plays out. If this ends up kind of commanding a higher price and this one goes back up to normal, we'll have to see. But really, this just feels like a complete, waste of time, but I'm not offended by it because it's not a huge price increase and not a huge performance increase. So it just kind of exists. I'm certainly not going to upgrade my benchmarking system that already has a 9800X3D in it because it seems like a bit of a waste. Now, What about Intel re-entering the memory business? I've been seeing this as like a hypothetical in my comment section regarding who's going to step up and produce more memory. And it's interesting to see Intel actually announcing some intention to do so. However, it's a little different than just hoping that they're just going to flood out some DDR5 memory for you, because this is a little bit more complicated. So they're saying they're partnering with SoftBank to introduce a new memory solution. And the goal is to capitalize on the memory shortages, but they're certainly focusing on more the AI data center side of things. But they're also apparently looking at a new memory technology. So this is a little bit outside of my expertise, but it is claimed that Team Blue will partner with SoftBank's SiMemory to develop a new standard called Z-angle memory, or ZAM. Now, what is ZAM? ZAM is apparently, here's a Intel official on the next-gen DRAM bonding method that they're probably referring to here. Standard memory architectures cannot meet the needs of artificial intelligence. NGDB defines a completely new approach that will accelerate our move into the next decade. We are rethinking how DRAM is organized to fundamentally advance computer system architecture, aiming to achieve orders of magnitude performance improvements and incorporate innovation into industry standards. And the idea here is angling stuff. So by angling stuff, things can be better. That's what I understand. You can go ahead and read more into this if you'd like. But what I'm getting out of this is this feels like the goal is to improve data center stuff for AI applications. But in general, let's say they did this, and let's say you can't use it in your gaming PC. That could still potentially long-term help the RAM situation overall for the gaming PCs, because if overall memory supply of any kind that's used by data centers is increased, then the overall supply-demand equation for memory in general starts to improve, and that can overall make it more possible to allocate, wafer capacity to DDR5 for PCs, etc. Now, any kind of thing like this is going to take a lot of time, so I don't think it's going to have any immediate impact on the memory situation. I'm going to be interested to see if anything comes of ZAM. If we'll see it in data centers, will it end up in normal PCs? Does it actually improve things? I don't know. Now, Arc Raiders is just continuing to make headlines, reportedly standing as the top-selling game across Steam, Xbox, and PlayStation for the third consecutive month. So Arc Raiders selling a bunch in January, looks like, according to Alinea, not quite sure how to pronounce it, analytics, they're thinking that it sold another 1.5 million copies just in January, making it, again, just continuing to sell massive sales. And I think that was just on Steam. That's just on Steam. Now, in other gaming news, Obsidian seemed to have a bit of a rough year. So they launched 3 games this year, which is kind of crazy. Well, sorry, not by this year, I guess I mean last year, 2025. They launched Grounded 2, Avowed, and Outer Worlds 2. However, unfortunately for them, Avowed and Outer Worlds 2 seem to not quite hit the sales expectations that they needed, although Grounded 2 seems to be doing well. So there's an interesting interview with them, and again, sources will be in the video description, where they discuss the problems that they're having and how they can try to move forward. One of the issues with Avowed and Outer Worlds 2 is that they both took over half a decade to make. So if you're spending like 6 years developing a game, it really drives up production costs. And that means you need to hit higher sales targets in order to have it be a financial success and be able to keep going as a studio. It's a really big deal. So they're talking about the fact that they need to be more efficient with how long it takes to create games. And I really think that this is a major issue in the whole gaming landscape right now, is it is taking way too long to make video games. It's to the point where you used to have a big developer produce 2 or 3 games on a console life cycle. On a 6 to 7 year console life cycle, again, you might get a game near the beginning of the life cycle, in the middle, and at the end, all from the same developer, same people working on it. Whereas now it's like you might get one for a whole generation. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And again, that means that they're extremely expensive. They have to sell huge numbers, or it's a massive crippling financial loss. So there's a lot of problems here. So they talk about like how they might be able to help that out, but overall, I think we're just in a weird place with the cost to make games. And something needs to give, because the current model is difficult to sustain. Anyway, video is getting on about 30 minutes now, so I think I'm going to stop here. I hope you guys found it useful and or interesting, and have an excellent day.